Happy New Year and welcome to the first In Focus show of 2018. I'm Dennis Ward. Today we're putting in focus one of the big stories from 2017 and looking ahead to what might be in the news in 2018. We want you to join in on our conversation. Our phone lines are open. Call us toll free at 1-877-647-2786. You can also tweet at us at APTN InFocus. Use the hashtag 2017 InFocus. Before I introduce you to our guests, let's set the scene. It was our top story for 2017 and likely to be a top newsmaker again in 2018, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. It's been a tumultuous year for the long-awaited, highly anticipated National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. After hosting a number of advisory meetings, the inquiry announced it would begin hearings in May 2017, but there was growing impatience.
I get that there's a lot of background work that needs to be done, but we still need to, take care of the families out there.
A coalition in Manitoba was already raising concerns over a lack of transparency that was leaving families in the dark. Hearings had not even started, and there were calls for a boycott.
It's the ongoing problems. It's the ongoing presentations of these problematic behaviors, the fact that we have consistently voiced our concerns, and that it's falling on deaf ears.
At the end of May, hearings kicked off in Whitehorse, but shortly after, the resignations started, including one of the 5 commissioners, Marilyn Poitras. That came as a shock. By the end of the year, more than 20 people were no longer working with the National Inquiry. Hearings were also being postponed, but the inquiry pushed on as calls for a reset grew louder. In November, the commissioners released an interim report. It included 10 recommendations, including the creation of a national police task force.
We believe that the appropriate authority to hear this evidence needs to be created immediately. Many families and Indigenous communities do not trust the institutions that are currently in place.
There was talk for the need of an extension to the 2-year mandate, and blame was placed on the government for challenges the inquiry was facing.
We have faced several obstacles from a bureaucratic and procedural and policy perspective in getting our National Inquiry up and running and mobilized all across Canada. We continue pretty much daily to speak to government about new options, new ways of doing things.
Things came to a head in December at the AFN Special Assembly.
And you're standing here giving us a report, hoping that we'll support an extension of the work that we don't understand and that doesn't belong to you. We need to see you resign, unfortunately, and I know that more women believe that all of you should resign, but for me personally, it's you. We saw a commission that is falling apart and is not doing the work that the women and children and men fought for, and I'm sorry to say that, but I think you have to go.
No request for an extension ever came. The inquiry is expected to resume hearings in Yellowknife on January 23rd. We are very blessed to have joining us in studio right now, Pam Palmater, a Mi'kmaq lawyer, professor, and the chair in Indigenous Governance at Ryerson University. Niigaan Sinclair, a professor in Native Studies at the University of Manitoba, and Tim Fontaine, a former journalist, now the founder and head writer at the satirical website Walking Eagle News. Thanks to all of you for taking the time to join us here this afternoon. And of course, we're going to start with the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. A formal request for an extension was expected at the end of 2017. That never came and was just another misstep in a year where we saw nearly 24 people leave the inquiry, as we saw also calls for the commissioners to step down. Pam, I'd like to start with you and how you would sum up 2017 for the inquiry and for the families and survivors.
Well, I think for 2017, since it started, in fact, it has been shameful. The only thing we ever hear about the inquiry in the media, and it's not the media's fault, is something bad. The fact that they had 2 soft launches, which is just another word for they didn't get their act together. You had a protracted summer vacation. some scurrying to get some meetings in, a whole bunch of delayed meetings, not listening to families, everything that you just said in your introduction. And now you have what's for 2018? What are the news headlines? Oh, well, we just got back from our break, but now we're going to go on an employee retreat. I mean, oh my goodness, this isn't a Fortune 500 elitist corporate executive company. This is something that's supposed to be dealing with a life and death issue that's actually still happening. And so I don't think they should get an extension. This inquiry is already dead in the water. It has no credibility. It needs to be completely reset.
Niigaan, how would you sum up 2017, the first year of the inquiry?
Yeah, I echo Pam's concerns with the inquiry, and I echo also the concerns that there should not be an extension. The real problem from the get-go has been this inquiry has been hamstrung from the beginning. A 2-year mandate was way too small, and then on top of that, there's a real lack of vision from the leadership of the inquiry. And you have to take an inquiry out of the hands of politicians. It's been in Ottawa, it's been centralized in Ottawa, and because of the control, and unfortunately because of it's been a political appointment, it's had illusions of patronage. And so because what you have is you have commissioners, many of whom I think all of them are committed to the issue, but they do have their own self-investments as well. There's a real problem in that they're spread out, they've got a huge issue, they've got too short of a mandate, and then they've also been hampered by the involvement of government, which has been stopping them at every turn. If you remember that the TRC had the exact same challenge, and it was only once they left Ottawa and came to Winnipeg that they were able to begin their work, really. So really the first year of the TRC was equally not a waste, but certainly a time when it had many obstacles and many problems in front of it. But it was the visionary leadership of the 3 commissioners that took it out of Ottawa, put it into Winnipeg, and then it can begin its work. Unfortunately, we're not seeing a similar leadership here.
Tim, your thoughts on 2017? Do you think that first year has lived up to some of the expectations going in?
I mean, it's really difficult, though, because you can't help but feel for the families. I mean, this is for them, and it's almost as if there are 2 inquiries happening. There's the commission, which is running the business of what this inquiry is going to do and what they're going to tell government and what they're going to tell Canada. And then we have these public hearings. I was at the first public hearings at Whitehorse, and it's an incredible experience. And I don't mean that like I'm a tourist or something like that. I'm saying like some of these families, that's the first time they've had an opportunity to tell their stories in an environment where people are actually listening. And if you pull that away now, what's left? I mean, do we restart, or do we, I don't know the answer to that. But that's the difficulty I have with it, is there's these very two different aspects of this inquiry. One that is so incredibly valuable, giving the families a voice, and the other, which is, I think we can all agree is failing, is when they're going to Canada and saying, look, this is the problem and we need help to do this, right? They can't seem to get that part of it together, and it's affecting how we feel about that one part where they're actually dealing with the family. So it's a really difficult position for them to be, for everybody to be in.
Pam, you made mention of the retreat there, and no doubt this is difficult work listening to these stories time after time for the commissioners and those involved, but news of this retreat, what do you think that says to not only family members, but those people out there who thought that this wasn't needed in the first place?
Well, think of the message that sends to families. Some of them have been waiting 10, 15, 20 years to find out information about their missing or murdered sister or daughter or mother or child, and you've got these commissioners who haven't even held all of the hearings yet, going off on a staff retreat and posting pictures online, look at us, look at all of this team building. To me, that's really just an insult to the families and to everybody else. Think about all of the communities who also suffer the loss when our daughters, mothers, and sisters go missing or they're subjected to horrible violence, and think of the money aspect. So they've spent the majority of their money, I understand. Now they're going to be spending more on this retreat, yet families couldn't even get food at some of these hearings. They were stuck in airports. So it's far more disastrous of a scenario to be able to organize a retreat, no problem, but you can't treat the families with the same amount of respect. That's just unacceptable.
Some terrible stories of families not getting the assistance they need, being left in airports. 2018, Niigaan's not starting off any better. The recent departure of the executive director, Debbie Reed, What are your thoughts on that and the impact it might have as we enter into year 2 here?
I want to be hopeful, but what I often turn to in situations like this as a guy that has 4 sisters. I'll turn to my 4 sisters who are much more versed on the issues involving the challenges that women face, the safety issues that women face, the issues around trying to deal with a society that constantly is undermining, exploiting, and then mistreating Indigenous women. And I turn to my sisters, and there's not a whole lot of hope there. There's not a whole lot of hope in people like, people I really respect, like Pam, and major other leaders right here in Manitoba, who I consider to be my sisters and my aunties. And I really take a lead from that. So I don't have a lot of hope, but I also think that it's of crucial note that we need to learn from this experience. This entire experience has been really evidence of a government, a federal government, that went headstrong into an issue that they really didn't know anything about and didn't consult with people who really were in the know, who knew how to set up a commission, who knew how crucial it was that this be outside the clutches of government and the political patronage that is always inevitable when it comes to Indigenous issues in the country. Governments appoint most often people who are wanting to get the work done, good people who have had good experience, but are ultimately this whole thing has been ill-equipped from the beginning.
Tim, do you think after the year they've just had that things can get any worse here for this inquiry?
I hope they don't get worse. On the other hand, like Niigaan and Pam, I don't have much hope that it's going to. On the other hand, it's difficult to imagine how the government could step in and stop it and reset it without it working disastrously against them. I mean, they tried. I'm trying to think of the last time a government shut down a commission. It was probably the Somali inquiry, which went over budget and over time, and they shut it down, and they got blistering attacks for that. It's the same situation here. On one hand, you might have families and advocates applauding that they've stopped it or reset it. On the other hand, politically, it's disastrous for them. This is a minefield any way the government looks at it, I think. And so that's the problem, I think, that we're really having. Budget is one thing. They can find the money if they really want to. Mm-hmm. You know, this government has shown how easy it is for them to suddenly come up with millions and millions of dollars for things that they want, right? The political will has to be there. So I think it's the same for this inquiry. Either you find a way to reset it respectfully without maybe interrupting and walking in and saying you can't do this anymore. There's got to be a way to fix it, right? I think that, to me personally, I think that's the only way to go forward. I mean, I would like to see it fixed before it resets and before families have to go through another whole period of waiting for this thing to be reborn again, right? Because they've, like you said, they've waited long enough. Mm-hmm. So it's a difficult situation all around.
Reports this morning that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who hasn't weighed in on this too much, what's been going on over the past year, says that they will not be, they're a long way from starting over or scrapping the inquiry. Pam, your thoughts on what the Prime Minister had to say there?
Well, he's the minister responsible. So as minister responsible for this inquiry, this all lies at his feet. All of the problems from the government's side and the failure to take action here. If you look at the TRC, you've got a scenario where the TRC was still allowed to continue. You had a reset, and I think there's maybe it's on how people are defining the term reset, but, reset in terms of getting new commissioners. You can still have the inquiry go on. You can still protect the evidence that's already been gathered so you don't subject families to the same process again. But there's got to be different people in charge. These people can't do it. I don't know how much worse it has to get, and does it have to get worse before someone takes action? It's irresponsible at this point. It's gone far beyond any of the problems I think that the original TRC had. Look at the Opal inquiry. If you wait too long, what will happen, it'll be like the Opal inquiry, where all of the people pulled out of it. And now that Opal inquiry report has zero credibility. No one relies on it. So is that what you want? Do you want to spend another 2 years and another $50 million for a report that no one's going to give it any credibility or participated in? And you're at that stage now where you've got NGOs and civil society organizations that have standing. There's lots of us who have standing who are now at the point of saying, well, if this isn't fixed, so that it is respectful both to the families and the process, it's supposed to be a research process as well, then we won't be participating in it and it'll end up dead in the water like Opal, and I think that's a waste of money.
When you mention Opal, you know, many of the recommendations that did come out of what ended up a lot of people pulling out of that, many of those recommendations still haven't been acted upon now. Niigaan, is that a concern with whatever comes out, whenever it comes out with this inquiry?
Well, I think if Canada has ever done something very well out of all of these processes is not following any recommendations from any report, all the way back to the Hawthorne report. I mean, going into these reports, there are inevitably a number of recommendations and calls to action that are called for and that are slowly drawn upon. But, you know, this government had an incredible amount of goodwill, particularly with Indigenous people, you know, and coming out of this. And unfortunately, that's dissipated slowly through the process of 2017 as this inaction has taken place. And as we see, you know, the creation of another Minister of Indigenous Affairs, as the expansion of bureaucracy continues, I think there's goodwill in this government that they may be able to turn it around. I don't think it's the end of the end here, but I certainly have lost a great deal of hope in the leadership of this government to be able to lead up this inquiry. And perhaps a report that did come out, will come out, if it does come out, will have some kind of measure of research. That's where I see the value here. The value that's left remaining, perhaps that might not be with the testimony of the families, although I would hope that they would be included. But most importantly, I think with some of the research, that we've got a real challenge with being able to research the issue of Indigenous women, because it's so vast. I mean, the TRC had residential schools, which is equally, I mean, as vast. But I mean, how do you begin to study the issue of Indigenous women? Like, where do you begin with that? I mean, that seems to me to be 3 or 4 times the size of the kind of report that the TRC created.
I'd like to talk about the extension and whether it should be provided, but first let's go to a clip from one of the commissioners who recently spoke about the extension.
I was one of them that was like saying, and I'm still saying, that it's important that we have that extension. We said clearly that it was going to be presented before Christmas. And of course, I was away the past 2 weeks before Christmas for family reasons. And I was told the reason. I was explained and I understood. First of all, because I was on the road almost every hearings, and we were hoping to present it in December, like we said. And when I saw the document, I said I would need to have it in French to make sure I understand every word of it. And it brought a small delay, a small one. But the other delay, I would say, it's also because we are running the human, how do we say in English, human resource capacity at a maximum. We're burning staff. We're even burning some of us, the commissioners. And the people who were writing this document for the government were also lawyers, were also executive directors, were also commissioner on the road. So we had a little bit of break during this December after the hearings, and now we are presented a few options. And this week, or next week, sorry, will be very, very crucial to decide how many years we're asking for this extension and so on.
Pam, you said you don't think there should be an extension granted. Why do you feel that way?
Well, why extend something that's all but dead? If they have a plan in place, and they certainly haven't presented a plan to any of the family members or any of the people that have standing to participate in the hearings about here's how we're going to change things, here's how, you know, we're actually going to get work done, here's how we're going to make sure we get it done in this time frame for a reasonable amount of time. Instead, all you see is this video, which you could literally play and hit repeat over and over and over and over since the inquiry started. Sorry, we're having problems. Sorry, we're on the road. Sorry, it's difficult staffing. We can't get a computer program. Government won't talk to us. We did submit a request. No, we didn't. Now we're doing it. All the families here are excuses. And if they're not up to the task, they need to come forward and say, we're not up for the task. And certainly, unless they're going to actually have an action plan and deal with these issues and show that they can, I don't think it's going to happen. I know there's a large number of people who wouldn't agree to an extension without a reset.
I understand we have a family member on the phone right now, Joanne from Hazelton, BC. Hi, Joanne.
Hi.
What are your thoughts?
I am a family member of one of the murdered girls in the Prince Rupert.
Joanne, how are you feeling about?
And listening to the lady speak, I just switched to APTN, and what I heard from her is just spot on as to what we see in the Northwest, in the Prince Rupert area in BC. That all I hear is that there are walks on the Highway of Tears, and that's on Highway 16. But and this is by members of the families with the missing and murdered women families, and they're doing it on their own and accepting donations as they go on their walks. But I've never seen or heard the representative of the people that are supposed to be helping murdered and missing women. I don't ever see them being part of the families, and I just think they need more support and more awareness, and maybe they need to maybe make public of some of the concerns of the families. I'm just saying this as I'm going to I just have a real great concern for the ladies who are doing the walks, and I feel very sad for them that they're not getting the support and the awareness of the whole of missing and murdered women's supporters across Canada. And I'm thinking the people need to be aware of what to look out for, and to maybe look out for our First Nation women and support them a little bit more as frontline workers, and as it was from the beginning of our days. Just my thoughts.
Joanne,
I make any sense. Just listening to the lady, it just really hit me, and it really makes sense as to what is really happening, and I believe that there should be more support for the families, and it's very sad that.
Joanne, we'll have to hold you there, but thanks so much for having the courage to call in and share some of your concerns with the inquiry. We're going to have to take a quick break right now, but we'll have more with our guests. And again, if you want to join the conversation, here's how. Join our conversation now. Send your thoughts in an email to infocus@aptn.ca. Like our APTN InFocus Facebook page, follow and tweet us @APTN InFocus, or call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Welcome back to In Focus. We're taking a look back at some of the big stories from 2017 and looking ahead to some of the issues we think will make headlines in 2018. And another one of those stories that has carried over from last year into this year is Conservative Senator Lynn Beyak and her take on residential schools. In the spring of 2017, the then little-known senator from Dryden, Ontario, in a speech said some good came out of the schools and some of the religious teachers were well-intentioned. Just a few weeks ago, she was turfed from the Conservative caucus by party leader Andrew Scheer for posting and refusing to remove racist posts on her Senate website. Here's a bit of what residential school survivor Garnet Ajnikaneb from Sioux Lookout had to say about alerting Scheer and others to the content much earlier.
As I decided I would let the leader of the opposition know, Mr. Andrew Scheer, as well I CC'd a copy of the same email to Senator Larry Smith. And so I was concerned that here's a high-profile senator in Ottawa spewing out a lot of negative comments about Indigenous peoples, not necessarily her comments, but using other people's comments and using her webpage to promote other people's comments about Anishinaabe people.
Despite the outrage, Beyak still sits in the Red Chamber and collects a very nice salary. Niigaan, do you believe there is any room in the Senate for people like Lynn Beyak?
Well, you know, the real shade in which this discussion has turned into an issue of free speech is exactly missing the point. The free speech thing has, I mean, anybody's free to say whatever they want. I could argue that gravity doesn't exist, but then I just take a pen and I go like this. That for me is about as worthwhile as engaging the issues that she's trying to address. They're just factually wrong. Just because people learned music or enjoyed sports did not mean that the system was not a genocidal system. And the idea that we can talk about the goods of the school somehow and that whitewashes the fact that it was a genocidal project to completely assimilate and indoctrinate Indigenous children and try to create them into something that they are not is an absolute nonsensical argument that is tantamount to arguing that gravity doesn't exist. So I have absolutely no time for arguing with someone who doesn't even have their facts straight. So for me, this is not an issue of free speech. This is an issue of a public figure who simply can't read a book, who can't read any research that's been done over 4 decades around residential schools, and is so inept, will argue that gravity doesn't exist.
I was going to wait to get to the free speech thing because there are some academics even today out with saying that this is about free speech and coming to the aid of Lynn Beyak. Pam, as an academic yourself, is this a free speech issue?
No, it's not. It's just blatant racism. This is someone who is blatantly and undeniably and proudly racist and is doing everything she can to harm Indigenous peoples through her racism or indirectly through allowing other people to post racist comments. And that's completely unacceptable. There's no room in free speech for hate speech. And I equate the things that she says and does, and it's not uncommon in the Conservative Party with regards to First Nations, always implying that we're somehow deficient or that genocide didn't happen. I mean, it's essentially denying genocide when we have an entire commission that produced a very substantial report that proved that genocide did happen: physical, biological, and cultural genocide. All 3 happened. So she, as a representative of the Canadian government, elected or appointed, it doesn't matter. If taxpayers' money, if all of the wealth from Indigenous lands and resources is taken to subsidize the salaries of MPs and senators, then there is no place for someone in Senate to have racist ideas, promote racist ideas, or encourage racist ideas against First Nations people in this country. And she should have been more than turfed from the Conservative Party, because all you've done is taken an already privileged person and let them maintain their privilege, and now she will have a soapbox to continue it without any accountability even to her own party. So ousting her from the Conservatives did nothing.
Tim, you've satirized all this, of course, on the Walking Eagle News poking fun at Beyak's son, who's also a city councillor in Dryden, Ontario. City Council there had quite a discussion this past week on it as well. Do you feel Nick Beyak should be stepping aside as well?
I don't know. I mean, he's doing what somebody would do, I guess. It's just, the whole situation is maddening because, they're I think what happened is they've been rightly called racist, and they're falling back now on the whole idea that it's free speech, right? That's a relatively new thing in this whole argument that I find all of a sudden now, no, we're talking about free speech here. No, you're not. You're spewing racist nonsense, and now you're feeling the backlash from it. But really, nobody is suffering from this except for the survivors again, because Lynn Beyak still gets to collect a wonderful salary. She's got a job she can phone in. She's not hurting in any way now, and now she has an even bigger fan base of idiots that support her. Like, it's an entirely maddening situation, and it shows you how frustrating that system is. I mean, she was appointed, and she'll retire because of this. The Senate can't get rid of anybody. There's no getting rid of her unless she decides to step down, and she's proven that she has no shame. So why would she step down? Like that, it's a maddening situation. I want that job.
Just name me a job in this country. Name me a job anywhere where if you did something that is factually incorrect, that is harmful to other people, and deeply, deeply disrespectful to people who have experienced a great deal of harm, and then perpetuate and say it is absolutely my job to do so, that person would be able to keep their job. Just name me any job in the country. Apparently a senator.
It's ridiculous. If you violate the Constitution, you shouldn't get any salary or pay or benefits or travel. Just remove it from her. And if you can't kick her out of Senate, although there was a senator who was removed last year for, inappropriate sexual activity.
Yeah, he was going to be removed.
Yeah,
so
exactly. There is a mechanism. So why can't we do it when it comes to First Nations people? First Nations people are always at the bottom of the barrel. Look at this national inquiry. You want to look at who's mistreated the worst? The National Inquiry is the epitome of how Indigenous women or Indigenous people are treated.
Yeah, and that's the thing, too, about this whole situation is that the media won't even, and I'm sorry, we're all part of the media here, but they won't even call it racism.
Yeah.
It's racism, right? Like this whole situation with Beyak. No, you know what? Just say it. Yeah. She's racist, and she's saying racist things. Like there's always this, it's always up for debate. You're right. When it comes to First Nations people, it's never racism. It's racism, and it's up for debate. And it sparked a debate about residential school survivors. No, you're denying genocide. That's what it is. It's not a debate about residential schools. It's denying genocide. And that's
exactly why this is not a free speech issue.
Yeah.
And those of us who are on media all the time, and we've kind of taken over for that. Sorry,
no, carry on.
But I think it's because we're so passionate. Those of us who are in the media, and we do hundreds of interviews on these subjects. It is fascinating to me that you have people on this panel or elsewhere who have PhDs, who have done years of research, community members who have been dedicated to this since the day one, and then we have someone who has absolutely no knowledge whatsoever, has no concept of what they're talking about, and says words that are harmful and hurt people. And then on top of that is given a platform of privilege, and that's supposed to be the equal part of the debate. Yeah. I mean, we've spent an entire lifetime dealing with these issues in our own families, in our own communities, in our own research, and then this is what's expected to be equal. That's why it's not free speech.
Equal time.
It's not free speech.
Yeah,
it's about harm. It is about this person perpetuating harm.
Yeah. And yet, Senator Beyak is from Northern Ontario, and Thunder Bay City Council failed to even pass a resolution that really meant nothing, just a resolution saying we should ask her to resign, and they failed to pass that resolution. Does Lynn Beyak maybe speak for some of the people of Northern Ontario?
I don't want to jump in, and I apologize if I interrupted anybody. But I was in Dryden 8 weeks ago, and I worked with 100 teachers at the Dryden High School who invited me out, and I gave a full-day workshop where we talked about reconciliation, implementing the 94 calls to action. That was invited by school administrators. That was by teachers. I've heard from those teachers since then. I'm working with those teachers now. There are people in Dryden who I think are equally harmed in this. Not as much, of course, as the survivors. But, I think Northwestern Ontario gets a bad rap because of the issues in Thunder Bay and now Dryden. But there are a lot of good people, non-Indigenous peoples, who are committed to work in meaningful relationships and getting their facts straight.
Yeah, that's true.
Tim, and maybe we're perpetuating this as well, but has the media turned Lynn Beyak into a martyr for some people?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's not, I don't think they set out to do that, but I think it's, if you have a media industry that refuses to say that something is racist when it clearly is racism, then yeah, you open it up to the idea of that it's free speech. You open it up to the idea that it's somebody, you know, the media loves the people that tell it like it is, right? And it's maddening. Like the media has played a huge role in this, but they can't. They're only doing their jobs. They're only telling, to a certain extent, something that they're seeing, right? So it's not as if the media is running off and making something bigger of this, because they are stupid comments, and it's from a person of incredible privilege. So it's definitely newsworthy, but it's, unless they are challenged adequately and smartly, then she just does become a martyr, I think. And I think she believes she's a martyr. I think she believes that she is this bastion of free speech, right?
We've got to throw to a break here, but before we do, quick, the Liberal Indigenous Caucus has asked for her to step down before Parliament resumes here in a couple of weeks. Just yes or no, quick around the horn. Will Lynn Beyak step down?
Of course she should step down and be sued.
But will she step down?
Oh, will she? Oh, probably not. This is like, she's going to have speaking gigs galore for Races Anonymous.
Absolutely not. She's now the hero of a bastion of ignorance in the country.
Yeah, she won't.
And on that note, we will take one more break, but we will be back to discuss more of what we think will be making news in 2018. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. We're going to check in with some social media now to hear what some of you have to say about today's topic. We asked you, what do you think were the top Indigenous stories of 2017, and what do you think will be the next big story of 2018 that will have an impact on Indigenous peoples? And first off, we'll go to Carrie Whitebear on Facebook, who said child welfare legislation. And Carrie, I spoke with you earlier online, and child welfare is going to be the focus of numerous shows that we have coming up here. Next up, we have Hannah, also from Facebook, and Tiny House Warriors, Stop the Pipeline, she says, and I believe that's going to be another story that certainly continues on into 2018. Next, we've got Ed from Facebook, who says the hate crime murder of Native girl Barbara Kentner and the swift response of Justin Trudeau condemning the senseless racist act. And he writes in, actually, the Trudeau part didn't happen, as we all know. Ed, we appreciate your comment. Leonard, 2018 could bring the other part of truth and reconciliation, in which Canadians weigh in on the Aboriginal industry and pity fest. And you can read much more of Leonard's longer post over on our Facebook page, APTN InFocus. And a comment from Twitter for a big issue in 2018, cannabis is legal only for medicinal purposes and under conditions outlined in the Access to Cannabis for Medical Purposes regulations. And if you would like to have your say, just to say, Jean will be speaking about that in just a second. If you would like to have your say on our topic of conversation today, here's how. Join our conversation now. Send your thoughts in an email to infocus@aptn.ca. Like our APTN InFocus Facebook page, follow and tweet us at APTN InFocus, or call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. And thanks for staying with us. We are going to turn our attention now to the coming legalization of marijuana. In Manitoba and Quebec, we see some First Nations getting actively involved and looking to set up shop. Here's Long Plain First Nation Chief Dennis Meaches at a recent signing ceremony on the benefits he sees of getting involved.
It'll go a long way to helping provide sustainable development in the years to come. Our people need to work. We need to lift our people out of poverty.
Of course, there are some voicing concerns and some who won't want pot in their community at all. Niigaan, we'll start with you and what you think is at stake here for First Nations.
Well, I think that yet again we're in a situation created by the Indian Act where you've got bands who have access to a resource. How are they going to access that resource or utilize that resource? and bring it to market. And I think this cannabis issue has provided an opportunity that may have some of the challenges that casinos present to us, bringing us to a kind of a crossroads of cultural and political life, but also the reality of living under an Indian Act where you have to utilize some kind of industry in order to create an economic livelihood for yourself. So I see many community members expressing a great deal of concern, but I also see chiefs bound by an Indian Act that continues to hammer them into situations where these very difficult decisions need to be made. And so I don't know what the right answer is in this situation. I guess it's a wait-and-see attitude. I know certainly that the marijuana industry, as it begins, someone is going to take an opportunity to that. So in the use of territories, I'm not so certain that it might not be an advantageous thing for some First Nations. But I do question when they go against communities, their own community.
Pam, do you see any economic benefits here?
Well, I think, first of all, it really should be up to First Nations to decide themselves as governments whether they're going to get involved in this kind of economic development activity and or health activity or not. But that being said, for those that do, they should be using their own sovereign powers and sovereign jurisdiction and lawmaking powers to make laws over it either way. So if their community decides this isn't right for us, they need to enact laws to that effect right away. If they're going to engage in it on a health front or on an economic development front, they need to assert their jurisdiction, oust the province and oust the federal government. Because just like with traditional tobacco growing, manufacturing and trading, or fishing, or selling eels or timber, or any of these, even historical gaming, traditional activities, provinces and the federal government have always swooped in, taken over traditional activities and taken all of the benefit and made it actually illegal for us. They criminalize us when we engage in things that we've always done. So when it comes to marijuana, First Nations on either side, pro or against, economic or health, need to assert their jurisdiction and enact their laws now and oust those governments from it.
Tim, do you see any risks here?
The risks that Pam talked about, I mean, Pam took the words out of my mouth. I mean, they should assert their sovereignty, and if they want to do it, then do it. But on the other hand, the risk I see is that the government will criminalize them. It's another maddening situation where for years and years, many First Nations people in Canada, individuals were criminalized for using marijuana, for selling marijuana, for making some sort of economic opportunity for themselves. And now it's large corporations that are going to come in and benefit from this very industry that they built in the first place, right? And so now you have a chance to legitimize it and to make some actual money from it. And even before it's legalized, it's already being monopolized. It's a maddening situation. And as much as I want to see First Nations reap the rewards from this, I bet you they won't. Or at least very little of it.
And they do that on every topic. Before settlers came here, we were engaged in fishing and trading in fishing and using fishing for everything. Settlers come here, colonial governments come in, they control the process. If we fish just to survive, we're criminals. So every aspect of our lives, even if it's just bare subsistence, let alone economic development or health, has always been criminalized. This is just another thing that will be criminalized unless we get out there and do it first. And you'll see there's been some success when we assert our sovereignty and jurisdiction over things like gaming or tobacco. We've had some success on that front, and we're going to have to do that right across the board.
This is a great example, though, of an issue that you get an issue like marijuana. And then suddenly, all of the other issues that come in, natural resources come in, provincial designations, the Indian Act comes in. The Indian Act controls all economic life. So we have kind of come full circle here, because really, ultimately, the real problem in the country is governance. Is that Canada keeps trying to control every aspect of our life. It's from day one, 1867, from the British North America Act, all the way up to now. And they continue to try to control our life. And so that's why we won't economically benefit. That's why even if we want to access natural resources in our own community, we still have to go talk to the minister and get some kind of agreement and permission. Our title is all limited by the state as well. And so I agree. We need to break out of those bonds. We can't wait for the federal government to replace the Indian Act. We have to break out of those bonds and just do it ourselves.
Yeah. Let's just do it. That's literally the solution to everything.
No matter what it is, we just have to do it, whether it's pot or anything.
Yeah.
If they legalize whatever, or whatever becomes valuable tomorrow.
And there's costs to that. I mean, if you remember, many chiefs started running gaming in their own communities here in Manitoba. And yeah, there was arrests, and yeah, there was court trials. But in almost every situation, when it gets to the Supreme Court, which I know costs lots of money, we inevitably win the issue. Because even when we're to ties, most often we win. Because in the end of the day, Canada's policies are inherently unjust. They are genocidal, and they're always about creating an environment in which we are under control.
And we are already seeing some of that criminalization on cannabis in Mohawk territory near Quebec. And I was going to ask if there's been enough consultation on this issue, but I don't even think we need to waste any time on that. So I'd like to turn our attention over to the coming Assembly of First Nations election in July.
Tim's getting very excited.
This is something you satirize on your website, the AFN, quite often on Walking Eagle News. And do you think there is a lot of criticism of the AFN? And do you think do people care who the next national chief is?
No, I think people like me who grew up watching it like other families watch hockey are interested in this sort of thing. But for the most part, this is, even the current national chief has said to the media many times, this is a chief's organization. And that's what it is. I mean, they may represent some of the interests we share, but I think for a lot of people, they don't speak for them, and they don't speak for... You can see the AFN now trying to extend its reach and say we represent all First Nations people, right? We represent anybody that's a treaty rights holder, but I don't think so. I think for a lot of people that live in cities or live off reserve, there isn't that sort of care about what the AFN does, right? I think the AFN has a huge image problem. The AFN, I think, needs to rebrand itself, and I think they probably shouldn't even call it a national chief because he's not a chief. He's not a prime minister. He's not a true leader in that sense. The Constitution of the AFN itself says he has no inherent political power. So call him a spokesperson, call the AFN what it is, a chief's organization, and I think they might get more buy-in from people. I don't know, but for the most part, there's a lot of mistrust, and there has been mistrust, historically mistrust of the AFN for a very long time, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. That being said, I don't know who's running, and I'm dying to know who's thrown their headdress into the ring so
Niigaan,
far.
I was going to ask you.
I would add that I would say to Tim, for sure. I mean, I've been on the record many times to say that the AFN's not a government; it's a lobby group, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, there's nothing to be shameful about that. And I think what you're saying is very important. It needs to own up to what it is and stop pretending like it's something else. But it doesn't have to be this way. That's the thing that I say is the AFN. That we've had many people who have come along. And I know, Pam, you did run on a platform to do things like this, but I know other people who have also run on a platform to make the AFN truly connected with grassroots people, with communities. I mean, you could take the control. I know that bureaucracies, and the AFN is a bureaucracy, the job of a bureaucracy is to continue the bureaucracy. But the AFN could, through many very significant and yet almost comparatively small changes, turn into an organization that actually represents people, that actually engages people. You could take this organization, which has millions and millions of project money, and be able to create a self-sustaining organization as well. Many innovative ideas have come in, and it's possible. So I'd like to give a glass half full vision to say that somebody will come along. This one's empty. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yours is still half full.
Mine's half full, but we should actually switch sides.
I think I would like someone to come along and for the chiefs to get behind that person, but unfortunately it hasn't happened yet. There's usually been a status quo kind of vision.
We're running really short on time, but Pam, I want to get you in. We're talking about potential people running. Any thoughts on running again?
No. I think the energy that was poured into Idle No More and all of the empowering grassroots people, that's far more important. And I think what's far more powerful going forward is actually to empower First Nations governments to do these things about asserting their sovereignty and jurisdiction and having the people be behind them, because the AFN has very little credibility amongst grassroots. It has very little credibility amongst the chiefs. Many of the chiefs have written in letters saying you don't represent us anymore. They have historically low attendance rates, and you have some who participate saying, well, we better do some damage control. So I don't think it's a matter of who you elect. I think it's really going to be up to the chiefs to say we need to go back to why we started. started. We were the National Indian Brotherhood for a reason, and it was to resist all of the assimilation and oppression that was happening against us, and they've long forgotten their purpose.
I'm going to have to hold you there, Pam, and everybody else, and my thanks to Pam Palmater and Niigaan Sinclair and Tim Fontaine. We joked off set that we were doing a 7-hour show, and I bet we probably could have pulled that off, but that is all the time we have for the show today. And before we go, just wanted to let you know that Tim will also be the new host of Laughing Drum, which will be back on the air January 30th. We'll all be looking forward to that. This episode will be available for download as a podcast at our website at aptnnews.ca/infocus-podcast. And if you missed any of the shows and want to catch up, you can check out the website, aptnnews.ca. Hope you can join us again next Wednesday when we will be putting the child welfare system in focus. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great day.